Okay, so again, central to a good economy has to do with the central organizing principle, and that is morality, right? Universal pinpointing moral precision, right? Universal pinpointing moral precision and the wise and righteous decision. Because the fruit of the righteous is a tree of life, and the fruit of the righteous is wisdom. So morally precise wisdom is what would really bring life to the economy. What is the purpose of building anything if people aren't going to be moral? And what's the purpose of trying to be moral if you're not going to be wise? So when you see these principles of the economy, right, cost effectiveness, accountability, transparency, we look at housing and oversight, we must consider very carefully what the effect is when we look at the policies, when we look at the process, the motive, the formula, the model, the output. What is the output of a reckless economy versus what is the output of a wise economy? And as we proceed, into 2026, and we see the mistakes of the past, are people learning from it, right? Are they expressing sense and insight? Are they failing to have the heart to insist on what is right? Are people coming together and assembling for a sound economy? Or are they forgetting the fact that there's 800,000 homeless people? Are they forgetting these things that we hear at times in the news, right? There's 60,000 people who die from every year from a lack of adequate access to health care. And the 100,000 people who die of drug overdoses. And all these homeless people die, and the 17,000 or so homicides a year. Okay, so what do you prioritize? How do you fix these things at the same time, right? How do you kill two jackals with one stone, so to speak? How do you address the root causes, the underlying causes? How do you address these things at the same time? So, when we don't care about each other, when we don't have the morality and the wisdom to care about each other, it's like, what's the point? What's the point of life without morality? Morality is a play on words for more reality, because to get to reality, you have to be wise. To get to reality, you have to be righteous. Wisdom calls out, right, the way, the truth, and the life, right? The truth. And that has everything to do with reality. What is the true reality? And a lot of people say, well, we don't know the nature of reality, but we do know the idea of a logical assumption. There was a lack of attention to the idea of a logical assumption that brought us to the point where people are neglecting the homeless. And when you neglect the homeless, they die. When you neglect the people who need health care, they die. When you neglect, to the process of building rehabs and building logical and cost-effective institutions to address societal problems, societal ills, okay, that people die. So people forget these things. You might say, well, that's fundamental, that's basic, right? But in order to have a comprehensive approach, we have to reinforce the fundamental truths, the fundamental ideas. Okay, people are suffering and people are dying. When there's 50,000 suicides every year in the world, in America, that means there's hundreds of thousands of attempted suicides because people are not being helpful and they're not being moral. They're not loving each other. That's why the greatest commandment is to love God with all your being. And the next greatest commandment is to love your neighbors yourself. Because when you aren't moral, when you aren't helpful, when you aren't wise, when you aren't insightful, when you're not trying to be these things to the best of your ability, maybe you're handicapped, maybe you're not, right? Maybe you're stressed, maybe you're down on your luck, but you've got to keep fighting the good fight of faith in the truth, of faith and wisdom and righteousness and justice, to do what is fair and just and right, to humble yourself, to serve God and humanity by doing what is fair and just and right. That's how people love each other. That's how people successfully build a society that's worth living, a community, a country, a group, an idea. So what is the motive, right? The motive should be morality and helping people out. What is the formula? The formula should reflect the central organizing principle. So when we're talking about economics, a lot of things are easy to understand. It's easy to understand interest rates and the debt. It's easy to understand how to deal with scarcity, when you understand why to be moral, why to do it a certain way. The things that are more difficult to understand at times might seem more simple than the things that are simple to understand. The most difficult thing to understand, and we know because of how people are responding. Plenty of people get good grades in school and they got fancy degrees in economics from various colleges, but they don't understand why to be moral. They don't understand why to love each other. And we know that because they're not doing it. And when you truly understand, you do it. When you truly understand, you have the wisdom and the insight and the justice in your heart and the desire, the inclination, the proclivity. You have the motive intact. And then you proceed with the righteous and just path, right? Walking in the way of righteousness along the path of justice. And that's where you find wisdom. And you first have to have a certain amount of wisdom, right, to kind of choose that path, and then the wisdom increases. That's how you become smarter than other people, right? That's what you want to do. Because moral, mental, spiritual, and romantic clarity are the same thing. In this society, they constantly want you to be less. They want to abuse you. They want to use, abuse, and confuse you. And it has catastrophic consequences. And can any of you honestly tell me that when people neglect the poor, when they don't love each other, that they look good, that they're successful? How can you be successful when you're turning your backs on the poor? How can you be successful when you refuse to do what is precisely right? Ironically, I just looked over and I noticed this Pentecostal Missionary Church of Christ, right? And here I am, Marshall is marital scramble, and I, Christ and the bridegroom, the Son of God, and there's lots of people all the time, they tell me, we don't want you to say that to people. We don't want you to say that to people. Well, look at the golden rule. Why should I not tell people this? Why would I not tell people this? You think that's doing unto others as I would have them do to me? If I was somebody else and Christ came back and the miracles were figurative and so on and so forth, I'd want them to tell me that. How could I love God without revealing myself in this dark time that we live in? This is the pinnacle of the life path, the pinnacle of martial arts, the pinnacle of loyalty to God. So they're the ones not keeping the golden rule. Why do they choose to be greedy? Why don't they choose to be selfless? And if it leads them to poverty or suffering or death, why can't they accept that? That is the test before them. That is what they must undertake.